All right, guys, thanks again for tuning in. As many of you heard, the population of Hong Kong is protesting right now. But the question for many Americans is why? It's an extremely complicated issue, and it goes back to their history as a British colony back in the it started in the 19th century. But on a basic level, they've been under British rule for 156 years up until 1997. So the Hong Kongers, yeah, that's actually the correct term, are protesting the Hong Kong's government bill, which would allow local authorities to detain and extradite people who are wanted in territories that Hong Kong does not have extradition agreements with. So, surprise, surprise, that includes China. Many fear that the bill would place Hong Kongers and visitors under China's jurisdiction, which would basically undermine the autonomy of the region and its citizens' rights. So let's just back up and look at the history of Hong Kong in general. Why does the population feel that China doesn't have a hand in their, or should not have a hand in their business? So Hong Kong has a special status, and it all stems from the British selling opium to the Chinese. So basically, the Europeans during the colonial period highly sought the Chinese market due to their porcelain. It's basically why porcelain dishes are still called China, because of their high quality, and other goods that they wanted, which was basically like silk and, more importantly, tea. So the Chinese, on the other hand, didn't really value any of the European goods. They just didn't see them as high quality. So as a result, they only traded precious metals and for the tea and porcelain. So a trade deficit began to accrue. So the British, being the British and loving their tea, drank way too much of what they could truly afford, and they realized they needed a quick fix by the 1800s. So the British needed precious metals to mint new coins, but they're basically just drinking all their metals away. So their solution was to trade the opium that was being grown in the British Raj, or British India. So it was really just a win-win for the British. Offload this excess cash crop that they really didn't need for something that they really did need, which was tea. So as you can imagine, this didn't really go over well with the Qing Empire, as they progressively saw their populace grow addicted to the drug, and they fought the British and their allies in the First Opium War. Ultimately, Great Britain emerged victorious and was granted trade rights and, more importantly, Hong Kong Island in perpetuity, which was later extended to the northern peninsula, which is called the New Territories, in 1898 with a 99-year lease, which ended in 1997. So going into the 20th century, I can definitely say that I'm a fan of Margaret Thatcher, but I believe she made an error in handing over Hong Kong to China back in 1984. I understand that Europe should be out of Asian countries' interests, but it seems that their rule was actually better for the people of Hong Kong. It's also important to note that the 99-year lease only included the new territories. So Hong Kong is located on an island that included the territory north of the island. So additionally, after the Second Opium War, Stonecutters Island in the southern part of Kowloon Peninsula had been ceded to the British in perpetuity under the Convention of Beijing. So the agreement in 1984 was called the Sino-British Joint Declaration. It basically granted all the stuff that they already gave them back to the Chinese in due time. So by 1997, when the actual latter agreement ceased to exist. So the Chinese basically believed that the historical treaties that were signed in the 1800s were not equal and essentially were null and void as a result. So, the British just the Chinese viewed the British rule over Hong Kong and its area just as untenable, since they basically almost ripped them off in the 1800s. So the British at least made the effort to at least negotiate a one country, two systems principle to be applied to Hong Kong. So Hong Kong would retain its own governance, legislation, currency, the Hong Kong dollar, and a capitalist society, at least until 2047. So as a result of this history, Hong Kongers speak Cantonese and English. They have their own passports, whereas mainland China speaks mostly Mandarin. Hong Kong even competes in the Olympics as their own country, and they participate in the World Trade Organization as their own entity. But it's important to note that China also still directs their foreign policy affairs. So let's fast forward to 1997. So after British returned Hong Kong to China in 97, Beijing promised to the Hong Kong population that they would be free to elect their own government, which, surprise, surprise, they've had their hands in it the whole time. They basically have a different idea than what the Hong Kongers actually think a true democracy movement would look like. It just seems like the Communist Party of China would only allow, or they really do only allow, candidates to run who were selected by Beijing. So it seemed that Beijing basically broke its promise that they promised to grant them free and open elections by 2017 even. And, the populace has just demanded true universal suffrage, and they haven't received it. So in June of 2014, Beijing released a report that asserted its authority over Hong Kong, which in turn led to protests. And since the population claimed that the communist leaders were essentially reneging on their promise of one country, two systems, basically, it is one country, but they wanted that capitalist society, not communist, right? So they were basically protesting this 2014 NPCSC decision on Hong Kong. So long story short, Beijing limited their elections, and it resulted in what was called the Umbrella Revolution. So if you look at all the pictures right now, they all have umbrellas. It's basically called this because the protesters would carry the umbrellas to block tear gas canisters that were being shot at them. So you can actually, watch videos right now of the protests where they have thousands of umbrellas and they're basically just protecting themselves. So as you can see, the situation is at its current level, thanks to the Sino-British Joint Declaration. It's been, the situation's over time just deteriorated. So, really, what were the British to expect? China to actually keep true to their word? I mean, I'm definitely not surprised. China banned the Hong Kong National Party. They've arrested, leaders of the opposition, namely Joshua Wong and Alex Chow, for example. Writers go missing and they later turn up in Chinese custody on the mainland. And they said they wouldn't do this. Beijing basically gets to select who gets to run the government in Hong Kong, and they constantly just meddle in their affairs. So it's, like I said, it's a situation that keeps getting worse, and I think the Hong Kongers are really regretting not having British rule for some time now. So, what do the protesters actually want with this latest march? They are hoping basically for a complete withdrawal of the proposed extradition bill from the legislative process. So that's the number one. They don't want to be characterized as riots, but rather protests. They want the release and exoneration of protesters that have been arrested. They want the establishment of an independent commission to investigate police behavior. There's been videos of the police just brutalizing even old people. I saw a video of a guy on like a gurney, and he was basically in a room, and two police officers were essentially just torturing him, like punching him in the nuts, punching him in the face, brutal stuff. And, this weekend too, there were gunshots that rang out. So they basically, shot a gun in the air. I'll get into more detail later, but, basically they want, universal suffrage for the legislative council and chief executive elections. So the chief executive is basically like their president. It's the person that runs their government. And currently right now it's Carrie Lam, and she's basically handpicked by Beijing for her pro-Beijing platform. So she was the one pushing for this extradition bill. And of course, she said that she wouldn't pass it, but then she's kind of going back on her word. So, the people that actually elected Miss Lam what they have is like a committee of about like 1,200 important Hong Kong people. So it could be like lawyers or just important businessmen in the area. And then they basically elect their leader. But typically, like I said, it's always someone that's pro-Beijing, pro-China. So Lam actually said the bill was dead. The extradition bill was dead on June 15, but she apparently stopped, like I said, on full withdrawal on July 9th of this year. So she hasn't been acting in good faith. So that's what's really getting this protest going. So, to make matters worse, housing is a big problem in Hong Kong. So as real estate prices are through the roof, the young generation possesses essentially zero hope to buy some real estate. They can't build families in the home that they want. So, what are the solutions? Well, several countries have issued travel warnings for Hong Kong. The protesters seem to be peaceful, but the police have regularly been shooting tear gas, rubber bullets. They just started using water cannons on them. The military was seen riding en masse to Hong Kong, which really isn't a good sign. I don't expect another Tiananmen Square to occur, given the new social media presence, but a crackdown seems to be imminent. Perhaps this could be a sign of just a straight up invasion of Hong Kong by the Chinese, but maybe it's just pure intimidation. There's been fake news too, with even troops like marching. I believe that the real ones are without tanks or with troops on the ground, but rather trucks that are just driving in. So the information is kind of, sketchy. We're not really sure exactly what to believe, but it's just been really interesting to see protesters carry American flags and, sing our national anthem. Perhaps we should just forget Greenland entirely and, try to purchase Hong Kong instead, but I do doubt that a purchase would be viable. I know they could vote kind of like a reformation or a referendum and join whatever country they want if they really wanted to, but I really doubt that would happen, especially why would the U.S. want to cause more problems with China right now? We can't decrease or deteriorate our, relations with China given the trade war that's going on. So, Hong Kong basically right now, they're just at the will of the Chinese government and, hardly any international opinions occurring. People just say like our thoughts are with Hong Kong, but there's really no action if you think about it. China's going to do whatever they want to do. So, you can call me a Western chauvinist or whatever you want, but I think it's safe to assume that the Hong Kongers really did prefer to be under British rule. But, Trump has encouraged Beijing to work humanely with Hong Kong. He even suggested that Xi personally meet with the protesters. Of course, Xi got extremely livid with this and said basically mind your own business. But it's a good play by Trump because then the protesters will certainly hear his words and react when Xi refused to meet. So, it's kind of, almost like what Lincoln did with the South with the Emancipation Proclamation, just to build up some kind of, negative feelings in the South. But anyway, of course, China's also been trying to spread misinformation. They have fake Twitter, YouTube, Facebook accounts to spread fake news. And YouTube actually cracked down on these accounts last week and deleted them. So Google did too. Frankly, I really just hope to keep seeing China misstep with Hong Kong and show the world what they really are. It's just basically a brutal dictatorship. They manipulate the currency. They send people into concentration camps that don't agree with their Han way of life. They infringe on territory in the South China Sea. They block countries from getting economic advantages, such as Vietnam and the Philippines. They place high tariffs on our goods. They undercut European tech like wind or bicycles. They steal our intellectual property. I mean, the list goes on. But, there has been a lot that's also happened over this past weekend. Like I said, there were some shots that rang out. Basically, a police officer fell down and the protesters were advancing and they basically shot a gun in the air just to buy them time to pick him up and get him out of the area. But there have been other videos of just cops just pointing guns directly at unarmed protesters. So what the protesters have been doing is basically just using laser pointers to deter any facial recognition programs. So they also been using marbles mixed with dish soap to make basically a slippery surface for when they kind of retreat. The police will follow them, but then they'll fall over, almost like a Benny Hill kind of sketch. But anyway, the police have really been clamping down over the past, I would say, week and a half. It's been getting worse. They've been losing their containment lines, and the more that they advance, the more push comes to shove. I think China is going to just go all out and kind of step in to support the police, quote unquote. This is basically what I think they really wanted in the end, so that they can kind of control the situation rather than the Hong Kong government. The police, though, on the other hand, they're just really highly incentivized by the Beijing government uh, just to, suppress the protesters because they have really good benefits apparently, and so their salaries are decent, and I'm sure they are worried about their own families, and they want to stay loyal. So everyone's got a mortgage to pay basically. So maybe that's what China wants us to believe, that the situation's getting so bad that they really need to step in, that they've hit the point of no return, and that would be the correct thing to do. I mean, maybe, sure, but I'm just hoping that we don't have a Tiananmen Square 2.0, or rather like a Tiananmen Island kind of affair. Hopefully it doesn't get down to that. But Hong Kong is essentially in a position where you don't want to, like, if they were like an abused child, like you don't want to send the abused child back to the abuser, but they're kind of like the house cat that got out of the house and explored the outside for the first time, and now the house cat can never be a house cat again. So it's the cat is basically already out of the hat, and I really hope to see China kind of deal with this delicately, and there aren't any like shooting deaths because of the military or the police. But I do think that there could be something that really happens here this time around. This has been boiling over for over 156 years, so it's a lot of history behind this, and I really hope that it doesn't get too bad. So I'll keep you guys updated. Thanks for tuning in again, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.